The word Renaissance means rebirth. It refers to the revival of classical learning and values from ancient Greece and Rome. After centuries dominated by the church and feudal systems, Europe began to look back at its classical roots for inspiration. The Renaissance marked the end of the medieval worldview. It brought a shift toward reason, human potential, and curiosity about the world. It wasn't limited to art, it also influenced science, literature, politics, and philosophy. This movement created the foundation of modern Europe. It encouraged questioning, exploration, and creativity, which are all key features of modern civilization. Historians often consider the Renaissance the start of the modern age in Europe. It laid the intellectual ground for later movements like the Reformation, the Scientific Revolution, and the Enlightenment. The Renaissance did not happen in isolation. It was driven by several key factors. First, the wealth from trade played a crucial role. Italian city states like Florence, Venice, and Genoa prospered through commerce, particularly trade with the Middle East and Asia. This wealth allowed them to support cultural activities and the arts. Patronage from powerful families, such as the Medici in Florence, helped fund artists and intellectuals. These patrons created a vibrant cultural environment where creativity could thrive. The decline of feudalism also contributed. As feudalism weakened, towns and cities grew, offering new opportunities for education, intellectual exchange, and artistic creation. The rediscovery of classical texts was another important factor. After the fall of Constantinople in 1453, Greek scholars fled to Italy, bringing with them ancient Greek and Roman texts that had been preserved in the East. This rediscovery inspired a renewed interest in classical ideas. Gutenberg's invention of the printing press in mid-15th century helped spread Renaissance ideas quickly across Europe, making books more accessible to a wider audience. Urbanization, with the growth of cities, created centers for art, education, and intellectual exchange, further fueling the Renaissance. Finally, an intellectual climate of curiosity and inquiry emerged, with universities and scholars beginning to explore humanism and classical learning. Humanism was the intellectual core of the Renaissance. It focused on the potential and achievements of human beings rather than divine or supernatural concerns. This shift encouraged a more secular approach to life, emphasizing the value of individual experience and accomplishment. Humanists revived interest in classical texts, the literature, philosophy, and history of ancient Greece and Rome. Scholars like Petrarch, Erasmus, and Cicero rediscovered ancient writings that had been largely forgotten during the medieval period. Education reform was a central part of humanism. Humanists believed that studying the classics could make people more virtuous and well rounded, leading to a more enlightened society. They advocated for a curriculum that included Greek, Latin, and the study of classical literature and philosophy. Humanist ideas influenced Renaissance art and literature. Artists focused on creating realistic, human centered works, and writers like Dante and Shakespeare emphasized human emotions, experiences, and individual character. Humanism also impacted society by promoting a broader worldview. It celebrated human creativity, individual potential, and the pursuit of knowledge, laying the groundwork for modern thought. The Renaissance brought significant advancements in both art and science, driven by the humanist emphasis on observation, creativity, and inquiry. In the arts, figures like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo changed the landscape of European visual culture. Leonardo's work was revolutionary, using techniques like realism, anatomy, and perspective to create lifelike images. His studies of human anatomy and engineering designs also showcased his genius across fields. Michelangelo's sculptures, especially the David, and his work on the Sistine Chapel ceiling, blended art with the humanist focus on individual expression and the beauty of the human body. Artists of the Renaissance were focused on capturing depth and realism using perspective, light, and shadow in ways that had never been done before. These innovations transformed art into a more expressive, detailed, and accurate depiction of the world. In science, thinkers like Galileo and Copernicus challenged established ideas. Galileo's use of the telescope supported the heliocentric theory, shifting the way humanity viewed the universe. Copernicus's model of a sun-centered solar system revolutionized astronomy. The Renaissance also introduced the concept of the scientific method, that is, emphasizing observation, experimentation, and evidence based conclusions. This laid the groundwork for the later scientific revolution. The printing press, invented by Johannes Gutenberg around 1440, was one of the most transformative innovations of the Renaissance. Before its invention, books were handwritten and extremely expensive, limiting access to knowledge. With the printing press, books could be mass produced, making them more affordable and accessible to a wider audience. This revolutionized the spread of ideas. Renaissance thinkers and artists could now distribute their works much more widely, allowing their influence to grow across Europe. It wasn't just the arts and philosophy that benefited. Scientific discoveries and theories were also disseminated more rapidly. The printing press also played a key role in the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther's 95 Theses, for example, spread quickly across Europe, challenging the Catholic Church and sparking religious reform. The increase in book production led to higher literacy rates as more people had access to written materials. Knowledge was no longer confined to monasteries or the elite. It became accessible to the general public, which greatly impacted the cultural and intellectual landscape of Europe. The Renaissance had a profound impact on both society and religion, with its emphasis on humanism and individual thought. One of the most significant effects was the challenge to church authority. Renaissance humanism, with its focus on reason and individualism, encouraged people to question religious dogma and practices that had previously gone unchallenged. This laid the groundwork for the Protestant Reformation. The rise of secularism during the Renaissance marked a shift in focus from religious to worldly matters. Education, art, and politics began to be shaped more by humanistic ideas rather than religious teachings. This shift was also reflected in art, where religious themes became more personal, often depicting human emotions and experiences. The Protestant Reformation, sparked by Martin Luther's 95 Theses, directly challenged the Catholic Church, leading to religious reforms and the creation of new Christian denominations. This caused significant divisions within Christianity, resulting in religious conflict, wars, and persecution, particularly in Europe. Humanism also encouraged the idea of individual interpretation of religious texts, giving rise to a more personal connection with faith. Over time, this led to greater religious tolerance and a more diverse religious landscape as the new sects and beliefs emerged, challenging the orthodoxy of the Catholic Church. The Renaissance marked a clear break from medieval thought, ushering in a new focus on the individual and human experience, in contrast to the medieval period, which centered on the collective community and religious faith. Renaissance thinkers emphasized individualism, celebrating personal achievement and creativity. While medieval thought was theocentric, that is, focusing on God and divine authority, Renaissance humanism shifted the focus to human potential and reason. This change was particularly evident in art, where Renaissance works introduced realism perspective and the portrayal of human emotion, moving away from the symbolic and religious themes that dominated medieval art. Renaissance thinkers also embraced scientific inquiry, using observation and reason to understand the world. This contrasted with medieval scholarship, which relied heavily on religious teachings and the authority of the church. The Renaissance emphasis on secular ideas like education reform and the study of the liberal arts also marked a shift from the medieval focus on theology and religious instruction. Philosophy during the Renaissance prioritized reason and empirical evidence, paving the way for the development of the scientific method. This was in stark contrast to medieval philosophy, which was largely based on faith and the writings of ancient authorities like Aristotle and Saint Augustine. The Renaissance, which began in Italy, gradually spread to northern Europe, influenced by trade, education, and the movement of intellectual ideas. One of the most important factors in this diffusion was the invention of the printing press. Regions like Flanders and the Netherlands became significant centers of Renaissance art and learning. Northern humanists such as Erasmus adapted Renaissance ideals to their own intellectual and religious contexts, focusing on the study of classical texts and questioning established beliefs. While Northern European art was influenced by Renaissance principles, it often retained a stronger focus on religious themes and meticulous attention to detail. The spread of Renaissance thought was also facilitated by the rise of universities, which became centers of learning and debate, encouraging scholars to study classical works and engage with new ideas. Moreover, the economic growth brought by trade allowed for greater cultural exchange, and the Northern Renaissance eventually played a pivotal role in the rise of the Protestant Reformation, as humanist ideas provided the intellectual foundation for questioning religious authority and practices. The Renaissance marked a dramatic shift toward individualism and secularism. Unlike the medieval period, where collective identity and religious devotion were paramount, the Renaissance placed a strong emphasis on individual achievements and personal expression. Thinkers and artists began to explore the potential of the human being, encouraging individuals to shape their own destinies and pursue personal excellence. Renaissance humanism, a central intellectual movement, emphasized the importance of individual autonomy. This was reflected in the art of the period, where artists like Leonardo da Vinci and Michelangelo focused on portraying human figures with realistic detail, capturing their identity and emotions. These works celebrated the human form, highlighting the significance of the individual. Secularism became more prominent during the Renaissance as artists, writers, and scholars began to explore topics unrelated to religion. Art and literature started to reflect worldly subjects, including politics, science, and nature, rather than focusing solely on religious themes. This shift was also evident in the growing influence of wealthy political patrons who commissioned art that celebrated individual power, achievement, and secular themes. The increased interest in scientific exploration further fueled secular thinking. Renaissance scientists like Galileo and Vesalius challenged religious teachings with empirical observations in astronomy and anatomy. This period of scientific discovery reinforced the importance of reason and observation rather than solely relying on religious doctrine. This growing secularism often led to the questioning of the church's authority over all aspects of life. The Renaissance also saw the rise of the concept of the Renaissance man, a figure who was well rounded, skilled in many areas, and capable of achieving greatness in intellectual, artistic, and physical pursuits. The Renaissance laid the intellectual foundation for both the Reformation and the Enlightenment by promoting critical thinking, reason, and a questioning of established authority. Renaissance humanism, with its emphasis on individual thought and the study of classical texts, encouraged a spirit of inquiry that directly influenced the Reformation. Thinkers like Erasmus criticized the church's corruption and practices, ideas that would later inspire Martin Luther's call for religious reform. The invention of the printing press during the Renaissance played a key role in the spread of these ideas. As the Renaissance works became more widely available, they reached a broader audience, helping to fuel the Reformation's challenge to church authority and contributing to the Enlightenment emphasis on reason and individual rights. The Renaissance also promoted the rise of individualism, a concept that would be central to the Reformation's focus on personal faith and the need for individual religious expression. As the Renaissance celebrated human potential and achievement, these ideas contributed to the broader questioning of religious institutions and traditional structures. Renaissance scientific discoveries, particularly in fields like astronomy and anatomy, directly contributed to the Enlightenment's reliance on empirical evidence and reason. This shift toward secularism, combined with the Renaissance focus on human achievement and rational thinking, set the stage for Enlightenment philosophers such as Rene Descartes and John Locke to challenge both religious and political authorities. Additionally, the Renaissance cultural and artistic shifts, with their focus on human nature, individualism, and secular themes, directly influenced Enlightenment cultural movements, helping shape the ideas that would redefine European thought in the 17th and 18th centuries.